My name is Leo Knighton Tellerico, and I have been an astrologer for about 25 years now. I've done that in Chicago, San Francisco, Santa Fe, New Mexico, and then the Portland, Maine area. So I do a combination of astrology and I do counseling. The kind of counseling that I do is like transformational counseling. What I mean by that is, you know how people go through like difficult times in life, they'll go through a divorce, or they'll lose a job, or something else will happen in their lives that may be difficult. Sometimes things that are really good too will happen in their lives. Anyway, big change comes into their life. So normally people just see it as bad or good luck, or somebody did something to someone and it's that person's fault or it's that person's fault. Well, with the model I've got with astrology, I see it in a whole different way. I see it as like a weatherman sees like a system moving in. So with astrology, you can see like a system moving in to a person's life. And when that system moves in, there's going to be changes in their life. And you can see those changes from a meaningful perspective, as opposed to somebody's fault or bad luck. You can see it as this person is ready for these changes so that they can grow in all new ways. And so I call myself a transformational counselor, probably more than anything else. I work with people when they're going through changes and shifts to help them handle those changes and shifts and to be able to see them from a bigger picture so that they can better navigate it instead of like beating themselves up or raging against somebody else or being scared to death that this came into their life and they have no control over it. Instead, you can see things totally differently when you have the astrological model to help you. And I've been doing it, like I said, for like 25 years. So, I mean, it works every time. A lot of times people will tell me about a time that happened 25 years ago in their life. And I'll be able to take the books out that show me what was going on planetarily back then and be able to see in greater meaning what those changes in their lives were about. I could do it the other way too. I could just look and see when the changes are coming and then tell them the years that there was change and let them fill out the blanks and tell me what actually was happening during those years. And then again, put it in a higher context or a perspective that they can see it as meaningful, not just happening randomly.
Planets have been retrograde lately.
Yeah, Venus and Mercury have been retrograde lately. Venus is direct and Mercury's going retrograde in just a few days again. So I met my wife out in San Francisco, and she's a psychotherapist and an energy worker, and we began the Spiritual Renaissance Center together, and that's what we have in South Portland, Maine. Is a Spiritual Renaissance Center where she does her work, I do my work, other people do healing work, massage therapy, things like that. Other therapists, other readers are all part of the Spiritual Renaissance Center. So what I want to talk about mainly today is like not just individual life shift, but the shifts that are happening for all of us collectively. I think anyone here would recognize that we're in a big shift right now. There's a lot of changes going on in the world. And of course, the changes don't only go on in the world, they go on in our personal lives too. Well, let me do it this way. There's an aspect called Uranus square Pluto that's been happening for the last several years, since 2010. And if you go back to the 60s and 70s, those same two planets, Uranus and Pluto, were making an aspect back then. So they were making a conjunction back then, and they're making a square to one another now. So it's like there was a wave of big change and transformation in the 60s and 70s, brought on by the Uranus-Pluto conjunction. And now, since 2010, there's another wave of transformation and change in our lives, with Uranus and Pluto again making an aspect to one another. This is the first aspect they've made with one another since the 60s. So let's see, has anyone been around back then besides me? Okay, we got a couple there. You remember that the changes were like unbelievably immense back then. And even those of you that weren't there can have seen movies on the 50s, and then you see movies from the 60s, and you can see what radical change there was. 50s was like the perfect American family, Leave It to Beaver, things like that. And then the 60s was the revolution. Women liberating themselves, African Americans getting more rights, people questioning their government and their world more than ever before. So that's what that time period was like, was people saying, we really, even though it's been like on the surface looking great in the 50s, there's so many injustices and so much that's wrong in the world, and we're going to fight and make those kind of changes. But it wasn't all graceful. We had a fight back from conservative elements back then, like Richard Nixon, the president, putting a stop, or wanting to put a stop to all the revolutionary changes that were happening. So it wasn't graceful change. It was a fight between those forces wanting to change our world and those forces wanting to put a stop to the changes in the world. Now, you know, when we got into the 80s, when the 70s ended, Ronald Reagan became president, and there was effectively a stop to all the big changes that were going on in the world. You may argue that maybe we needed a stop to the changes because they were happening so fast and furious and they were so chaotic that it was hard to catch up to them sometimes. So maybe there was a need for the stop at the time. Now, move forward to 2010 and beyond, and it's time for the changes again. Just look over the last few years, LGBT rights have been really strong in these last few years. Ferguson, Missouri, African Americans fighting again for more rights. So there's another big wave of change happening in our world again. Donald Trump gets elected just this last year. And then people are saying, wow, there's no change happening here. We're all moving backwards now, and this is scary the way we're moving. And that's true. Haven't a lot of you gone through some, worry and stress around the changes since he's been president? So this part of the change is about, like if a woman's pregnant and then she goes through these horrible labor pains before the birth, it's kind of like that. And it's also like the old dark before the dawn. I mean, there's all sorts of metaphors I could use, but that's where we're at right now. In my way of thinking, and this is astrologically based, we're moving out of an age of Pisces and we're moving into an age of Aquarius. And that's the reason for all the shifts and the changes that even started back in the 60s. They even sang, I think they sang a song, Dawning of the Age of Aquarius, back then. So now it's just another movement forward with that age of Aquarius after we had put kind of a stopgap on it, just kind of slowed things down. Conservatives are meant to not stop things and pull us backwards. They're meant to at their best, meant to slow things down, don't go too fast, remember the past, remember how it used to be. Because even if you think of your own individual lives, when changes are happening too fast, it's kind of chaotic and it's kind of out of control and it's hard to handle sometimes. So that's what happens when we have a stop put on things. But this time it's a little more scary than usual. And I don't know if I'd call him a conservative, a liberal, I don't know what I'd call him. He's just someone who reminds me of like Nero when Rome was burning, or Caligula, the emperor, who was kind of crazy when Rome was starting on its downfall. That's kind of like what he reminds me of. So I think it's true that the United States is losing some of its power in the world, and I don't think that's going to stop. So let me tell you for a second what the Age of Aquarius is partly about. Aquarius is about equality. And it's about liberation from that which dominates us and controls us and takes away our ability as individual humans to decide the fate of our own lives. I'll give you an idea of a time period where you get a sense of what the Age of Aquarius is like. The planet Uranus, which is the ruling planet of Aquarius, was discovered in 1781. So when a planet's discovered, you take a look at what's going down on the Earth to have an understanding of what that planet represents. So in 1781, we had two revolutions that were going on in the world. We had the American Revolution and we had the French Revolution. And both of them, in essence, had the same core need or value, and that's breaking down the power of the kings and the queens and allowing human beings to have a stronger voice in their own world. So breaking away from the chains that dominating authorities put on us so that we as human beings can decide our own fate. Isn't democracy based on that? Power to the people making the choice. And that was part of that revolution too, in both France and in the United States. So that's what the Age of Aquarius is. So now, if there are any countries or entities that are controlling the world that we live in and are more powerful than all the other countries and therefore have more privilege, those countries are going to have to come more into balance. So I believe that that's what's happening in our world. The power, the sharing of power throughout the world is changing and shifting. And the United States is moving with that shift, and we have the perfect president for that to happen. Let me give you an idea of some changing ages from the past. So the age of Aries was like around from 2000 BC to when BC changed to AD or whatever they call it now, the shifting.
I think Aries was the Old Testament time.
Exactly. So during that period of time, we had the Old Testament, we had the beginning of empires, and we had a prevalence of wars all over the world. That's Aries. The ruling planet of Aries is Mars. Before the time of Aries, actually, pretty arguably, was more of a matriarchal world. And then when the age of Aries came, we turned into more of a patriarchy, because it was the age of Taurus. The ruler of Taurus is Venus. The ruler of Aries is Mars. So you can see the change from a feminine Venetian way of being to a Martian male way of being. Then the age of Pisces came at around the shift where BC turns into AD. And what happened at around that time? The birth of Christ. The birth of Christ, well, let's take it one step further. Christ is like an archetype of what Pisces is. Sacrificing yourself for the greater good, compassionate, especially toward those who are in trouble in our world, empathy, A lot of the things that Christ represented is what Pisces is about, and that began the Piscean Age around that time, maybe a few hundred years before. Because what it was the beginning of organized big religion, was at the turning of ages into Pisces. So for instance, Judaism really got strong around 700, 800 BC. Lao Tzu was born at around 500 BC. Buddha was born around 500 BC. Christ, I told you, was born around 0. And then Muhammad was born about 600 or 700 AD. And most of those people that I just named, they then began these big organized religions, whether it's Buddhism or Muslim or Christianity. So these last 2,000 years or so have been the growth of these huge religions, and in a lot of cases the religions ran the governments. They weren't secular anymore. The Christian church, the Catholic Church, ran Rome. So religions began to take over our world, and religious wars started happening, like the Crusades during this age. And now we have the same thing happening. People fighting and killing for God. Obviously a misuse of what spirituality is, a misuse of what the original people who started the religions were about, but nevertheless, that's what has happened. It's almost as if the age of Aries and the age of Pisces kind of melded in a really dysfunctional way, if you know what I mean. So you got the wars and the religion, and they're kind of coming together. And
The
often,
Baha'i writings say that we'll go through the pangs of birth and death at the same time, that the old age is dying out, the world is collapsing, we're coming into an age of fulfillment.
yeah.
Uh,
But we're coming into an age that's going to be totally different than the previous age, for sure. And it's true, when you get to the cusp of these ages, that's when there's so much tumultuous events that happen, right at the cusp, right in between, at the transition, which is where we are now.
Have you ever read in the Aquarian Gospel, in the introduction to it, the cusp of the ages between the seraphim and the cherubim from one age to another? I think it's incredibly beautiful, but it's quite an eye-opener. Are you familiar with it?
No. So let me
it up.
I will. Let me just kind of stay on the track because I only have so much time. So 2010, things started picking up again toward the change with the Uranus square Pluto. So we had like the Arab Spring, I think it was 2010, and we had a lot of other changes from 2010 to 2014, and then in 2014 there was a big shift again. And that's because we had an eclipse that was a cardinal grand cross eclipse. So whenever there's these big eclipses that have important astrological configurations within the eclipses, that's another big wave of change. So in 2014, I had predicted through my writing that there would be a big shift in things at that cardinal grand cross in April of 2014. At that time was the rise of ISIS that everybody saw. At that time, Russia invaded parts of Ukraine. At that time, Ferguson happened. African Americans rebelling against the fact that they had been murdered, that one of them had been murdered in Ferguson, Missouri by a policeman unjustly. So that was a big turning point.
What about this new eclipse that's coming up this
Oh, I'm going to get there. We're definitely going to.
And what about that nut
definitely
job
gonna talk
over in
about that.
Korea? What does the astrology
We're gonna-
say about that?
We're gonna talk about that. We're gonna get there. So, astrology isn't the only place that's saying about these great changes. There's biblical ways of looking at these shifts. Hopis talked about this period of time being about a big shift. The Mayans talked about it. Of course, they said it was going to be December of 2012. But there's all sorts of different prophecies around the big changing of ages. Astrology is not the only one. Individuals go through changes at the same time. I'll get to the August. Individuals go through these transformational changes at the same time. And individuals will go through the changes when the planets Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are in their natal charts, meaning where Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are now, connected to where a person's natal planets are. That's what causes the changes coming into an individual's chart. So remember, we already talked about Uranus. Uranus is the one that was discovered in 1781. So when people get a Uranus transit in their individual lives, it's a time of awakening. It's a time of being freed from things that keep you stuck. It's a time of liberating yourself from things that hold you back. And it's a time of looking at things in inventive ways that you hadn't looked at them before. That's when Uranus is around. And it can, what can cause it, what the kind of events it can cause is like something happening in your relationship, something happening on your job. But it also happens that you could be taking a new spiritual class that opens up your mind. You could read something else that makes you look at things in all new ways. But when Uranus is around in your natal chart, it's going to cause big change, big awakenings in your life. So that was 1781, it was discovered. Keep in mind that before 1781, the furthest planet out that was known was Saturn. And Saturn was considered the greatest god of all gods, planetarily speaking, because that was the one furthest out that people discovered. Saturn is about the Old Testament God. Saturn is about punishments or rewards based on what it is you're doing right or wrong. Saturn is about time. Saturn is about limitations. So those that have answered to the Saturn God have believed that life is fated. And there's certain ways it's going to be that you can't get out of. When Uranus was discovered, remember what we said before, it's breaking away from authority figures or anything that tells you that's the way it's going to be and you have no choice. So with Uranus, you then have choice as to what your life is going to be. You know, there's always a thin line between what's meant to be and what we can choose. Have you all noticed that when you have your own changing times? It's like, how much was this meant to be? And how much did I make choices that got me to this place? And it's really difficult to discern sometimes. But in my way of looking at it, it's always a combination in some way. It's not one way or the other. Some people have really big, I choose my destiny, and then other people have the sense of, oh my God, I'm a victim, look what happened to me. But really it's a combination of the two. We're constantly working with how much we're choosing and how much it was meant to be. And that's what co-creation is about. Co-creation is working with how much are we determining and how much was it meant to be. So Neptune was the next one discovered, and that was in 1846. And around that time, Marx came out with his Communist Manifesto. But the essence of the Communist Manifesto, not all the stuff that he wrote about, was that workers were downtrodden and controlled by big moneyed interests. Again, a voice for the little people being free of that which controls them, whether you believe in that way of thinking or not. That's the essence of it. Then in 1930, the last transformational planet was discovered, and that was Pluto. So Pluto is about power. And a lot of really powerful figures were coming on the world stage at that time, like Hitler, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Al Capone, really powerful figures. At the same time, Gandhi was strong at that time. And Gandhi was teaching people about the power of the people again, because he fought with civil disobedience against the power of England. So you can see all these planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, are all coming to the same place. And that's that we humans have the ability to break away from that which controls us and decide our own destiny. And that's where we're headed to. Whatever it looks like on the outside, and it looks sometimes exactly the opposite of what I'm saying. But remember the 60s, remember other times. It wasn't all graceful, and it didn't all happen when we snapped our fingers. The changes happened through a process, and then there's a birth. So when you go through your own transformations, number one, it's important to get a bigger picture. Number two, it's important to not buy into the fear that the world is throwing at you, because fear will take you into all the things that the old world stands for. Fear will stop you from going through positive transformation. If instead you transform it into love and truth, you then are on the path into the consciousness of the new age. I say truth too, not just love, because you take a look at our world, it's filled with so many lies. It's like you don't even know half the time what's the truth and what's not. The media will either be skewed toward one way of thinking or skewed toward the other way of thinking. Politicians are constantly spinning things. So to actually know the truth is a very difficult thing, and you have to really dig deep to find the truth. You can't just buy into whatever somebody is telling you or whatever someone has written. So really finding the truth and really finding in your heart love in different situations is what will take us into this new world individually. So let's say that your husband or your wife or your partner cheats on you and leaves you. Are you going to feel love? No. Not at first. First, you're probably going to be extremely angry and extremely hurt. But if you have an intention of looking at both sides of it and taking responsibility for your part in it, through time, you'll come to a different place inside yourself. It's like when somebody leaves somebody and leaves the marriage, I'm not saying that the other person's at fault either. I'm saying that most likely something broke down in that relationship a long time ago. And so it's good to take a look at what both people's parts and why it broke down. Again, not immediately. You have a right to your rage. You have a right to your hurt. You shouldn't have to say, oh, well, I better change it so I can be with love on the planet. That would not be natural. It would not be aligned with how we go through things as human beings. But if you have the intention of finding that in time and maybe getting some therapy or getting other kind of work that'll help you through the process, you'll be able to get to a place that will keep you on track with your growth, as opposed to taking you into those places that will kill your soul and heart. And that's unbelievable. Fear and rage will kill what your soul is trying to evolve and grow into. Doesn't mean never be afraid, but it means don't let it overtake you. because that's when you'll get off the path. So there's some old rules in the old world that we need to move beyond. So in my estimation, one of them is that it's kind of a survival of the fittest thing, where it's me against my neighbor, where it's dog eat dog, where I have to win, and then I get most of the prizes when I win. Well, that's really not taking us anywhere. You have to be really dumb to think that's taking us anywhere. So that's part of our growth and our evolution, is to start seeing things differently than that. Start seeing that, wow, you mean we're all part of the same human family? Oh, big wake-up call. We are part of the same family, regardless of the differences between us. We all have the same basic needs. We all want shelter. We all want food. We all want love. We're born through a woman. I mean, there's all sorts of similarities that we all have all over the world, regardless of the culture and the colors of our skin. I'm not trying to preach anything. I'm just saying what's going to help us get to a new age and a better age. I'm not saying that survival still isn't important. But to me, survival is now dependent on all of us being together. That's still evolution, because it's about survival based on adjusting to what you're presented in your environment. So what we're presented with in our environment, nuclear weapons, hate, people trying to destroy one another, the only way through it is that we get to a consciousness of, we're all in this thing together. And some of you are sitting there going, oh yeah, well, we're real close to that one. And it doesn't look like it, I know. But I see more and more people awakening than I've ever seen. Even back in the 60s and 70s, I'm seeing more and more people waking up. And that'll continue. At the same time that so many people are buying into the fear and still feeling the hatred toward those that are different than them. There's a whole bunch of people that are having just the opposite experience now. And those people are the ones that are going to bring us into this new age.
What about Korea? North Korea?
That takes me into the August events. I'm glad you brought that up. So the next big time of change this year, this is a big year of change, and the real turning point is going to be in August of this year. There'll be 2 eclipses in August. One will be on the 7th of August. That'll be a lunar eclipse. All lunar eclipses, by the way, are full moons. And then the second eclipse will be on August 21st. And it will be a new moon, total solar eclipse. And new moons, and solar eclipses are always new moons. So it'll be a new moon solar eclipse in Leo. It'll be the first time that the eclipse comes all across the United States since 1918. It'll start up in Oregon, and it'll come diagonally all the way down to South Carolina. Like I said, the first time since 1918 that has happened. If you look back to 1918, one thing that was happening was we had World War I in 1918. This eclipse, the solar eclipse, on the 21st of August, I study the charts like of different presidents and people and things like that, as well as countries, because countries have births too. Like, for instance, the United States is July 4th, 1776. And other countries have births too. So that eclipse will be right on Donald Trump's Mars in Leo in his natal chart. To the degree. It will be opposite the United States moon in Aquarius, which is our connections through our values to the Aquarian way of looking at things. It will be conjunct, to the degree, North Korea's Saturn from its founding. It will be conjunct the north node of the moon of Syria to the degree. So it's going to be an extremely powerful eclipse on all levels. Now, the conclusion we can jump to, I'm sure you have already, from what I've said, is we're going to have some kind of big war that's going to happen around that time. And that's quite possible. But now it comes back to that question we were talking about before. How much are things meant to be? And how much do we have a say in the way things are moving? No matter what you answer to that question, can it hurt for all of us to get into a place of seeing we're all in the same family and putting more love instead of fear into our hearts? That's going to help. It might change the direction. And even if it doesn't, it's going to create a great foundation for when we get to this age of Aquarius. And by the way, we're going to get to the age of Aquarius as a human family, no matter what happens in August. That I can tell you for sure. That's going to happen. What we have to go through, as I said before, what we have to go through before that, that's what's up for question. Can we go through it gracefully, or will it be really hard? Right now, it looks like it's going to be really hard.
Kim Jong, is he completely insane?
No.
Schizophrenic or something?
I don't think so. I think that's just Western media tries to make him into that. I think he sees that he's going to be squashed by people that have nuclear weapons, and so he built some of himself. All of them. They decided they better, Iran too. You know, if my neighborhood is filled with people with huge guns, I wouldn't get a gun. But don't you think most people would get a gun then to protect themselves in the neighborhood? So I think that's more what it's about. I think the way through it is we sit down with him as if he's a fellow human being and have a discussion with him on how we can work this out. But by threatening each other back, and I grew up in tough neighborhoods in Chicago, like tough Italian neighborhoods. You don't like challenge each other. You're going to get killed. And that's what's happening now. You don't tell somebody, you know, I'm tougher than you, don't mess with me, because that's just going to get us all killed. So we have to assume he's a human being trying to fight for what he believes he needs for his people and for himself, instead of demonizing. You don't think they demonize us? It's the same thing. We're the great Satan. You know? Iran does that. So both sides do the same thing. The other side is the great demon. And if you keep listening to the media and listen to the pundits, you're going to get more and more steeped in demonizing, because that's what they program us to believe. So you can see another thing that helps with transformation, and that's letting go of the programming that's happened from society and happened from your families. And I say your families because think about it. If one mother is cold and distant from her children, the tendency is going to be for her daughter to be exactly the same way. It like gets handed down from generation to generation, unless somebody wakes up and says, I'm not doing it this way. You know, you got to become really conscious and really awake to change the patterns. Yeah.
Now, when does the real Aquarius pick up? I mean, when do we start to see the really solid change?
Well, different people have different opinions on that. I believe that the portal will open for the beginning of the age of Aquarius in December of 2020. So if that's correct, we have 3.5 years of probably the dark before the dawn. Any other questions?
A few years ago, you were given a talk, and I asked you, do you think, it was I think 206 maybe, is there gonna be a depression? And you said probably, and I think there was.
In 2008 there was, yeah. 2008 there was, yes, yeah.
So, I'm feeling like, I could tell with my work, like, when it gets like a storm cloud with the finances, it seems like it's that way now. And I'm wondering, astrologically, is that in the cards? Like, is it gonna blow? You know, or is it just gonna be kind of band-aided, or what, do you think?
No, I think the stock market is going to
Yeah,
crash over the next
yeah.
probably year, I'd say.
And the dollar is.
Well, the dollar's already getting changed by China and Russia now. They're not buying into the dollar system anymore.
Are you talking about a 1929 crash, or are you talking about like a stock market correction?
No, I'd say more of a crash than a correction.
You mean like 1929?
I'm not an economist, but yeah, to the best of my ability to discern those kind of things, I'd say more similar to that, yeah.
Did you have specific planetary things going on in October?
Yeah, thank you. I'd mentioned them before. I don't remember right now with the planetary stuff, but there's some stuff September, October, November this year that would be most apt to,
Some pretty extreme
yeah.
market issues.
Now, with the equalizing of the powers in the world, I know that the United States is losing its. Are some of the smaller countries going to be rising up and becoming more equal?
Yeah. That's what I believe. I mean, you know, when you look at the Security Council, it's really so unjust. I mean, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council all have nuclear weapons. What, does that get you an entry? No wonder people want to build nuclear weapons. You get a nuclear weapon, you get more privilege in the world. All 5 of the Security Council members are all nuclear weapon holding countries. And that's most of the nuclear weapon holding countries in the world that are on that Security Council. So if you have a thriving economy and you have nuclear weapons, so if you have power, you have more voice in our world. Why would that be fair? Why wouldn't everybody have equal voice regardless of how much power and money you have? And again, that's Aquarian. Yeah, that's part of the shift. Exactly, that's part of the shift. Yeah, yeah. So I didn't bring any cards with me, but if anyone's interested in any readings of any sort, I've got a desk, Spiritual Renaissance desk in the place there. Just come on over and I'll give you a card. We can talk about what a reading would be like. I'm in South Portland. Thank you very much.